You talked about government orders test. How do businesses qualify under that piece? It's very easy to understand the black and whites of the gross receipts test. How do they qualify under a government orders test?
So the government orders test is language that Congress put into the ERTC itself and said that a business qualifies if its operations are interrupted, suspended, permanently or temporarily by a legitimate government order. And so we look at the operations of the business during 2020 and 2021. There are a number of ways that businesses were impacted. I mean, we were all impacted. It's hard to find a business that doesn't. I mean, a remote, like a SaaS organization where everyone works remote and they're only selling to businesses that are remote. I mean, even a SaaS organization that was selling a software, if they sold it to restaurants or theaters, government order impacted them. So essentially, we're looking at a government order that caused an interruption, a suspension, temporarily or permanently, of the business's operations, and that applies to nonprofits as well. So, we that's a federal, state, county, city, or health department order. Any of those qualify. You can imagine living in New York with Cuomo and the health department, and they were doing everything. So, you take a business and you look at their operations. So, one very obvious thing is in most states, if an employee showed up with sniffles or anything that remotely resembled a symptom of COVID, you had to send them home, and it was for 2 weeks. Well, I would suggest that prior to COVID, if someone showed up with sniffles, you wouldn't send them home, and you certainly wouldn't send them home for 2 weeks. Not to mention anyone who had been in close proximity to that person, you had to send home in most states. So that's one thing that impacts your operations.
Now, a lot of times those were health orders, the county health orders, which would qualify.
Yeah, or sometimes the state had a health division that they would issue those. And then you look at the supply chain problems. So California shut down the largest port in the world, the Port of Los Angeles. They also shut down the Long Beach port. So we had hundreds of these big container ships out in the ocean. Well, that had a domino effect across the country. So components of things, if you built something, or the actual machinery you needed, or parts for your machinery, vehicles, you needed a truck for your construction company, you needed tools. That if you were not able to get your items because they were out in the ocean, that's a supply chain problem. And that would make you qualify for that period of time. Travel, yeah. I mean, if you
seeing clients, stuff like that.
Sure. I mean, you couldn't fly into New York or New Jersey, if I recall, and you for a period of time there, you could, but you had to be quarantined. So those restrictions, many places you couldn't, like in California, it was against the law for a period of time there to have any more than 3 people in an enclosed area that were not related, more than 3 people. So those, so we talk about the occupancy limits. So you couldn't let people into your waiting area, or your front of your restaurant or business. So they limited the number of people. You had to keep them 6 feet apart. So some people had to stand outside. Well, that's interruption with your business operations. What else?
Government offices closed.
Yeah, government offices are closed. Yeah, so they're closed. So if you're a contractor, home builder, your projects were stalled or even canceled because you couldn't get the permits because they weren't allowed to come to their offices. And they tried to have some of these government employees work remotely, but it was not very successful. And then to advance your project, you needed to have someone come out and inspect. Couldn't get inspectors out there. So it messed up those people too. Steel was impossible to get. It was out in the ocean. So many different things. So you say, well, I was an essential business. Well, so you take your doctors, you take your surgery centers. They were essential, but they weren't allowed to do non-emergency procedures. So elective procedures were not allowed. Well, that's a significant part of their business. So that interrupted their operations.
Great.
Yeah, it was really something. So most businesses qualify under the government orders test.
And is that something that I have to figure out what the test is that I qualified under? Do I have to figure out what hey, this mandate or whatever, this order,
No,
or how does that
no,
work?
the tax law firm's going to work with you, and they're going to identify the orders that impacted your business. They're going to identify how it impacted your business, and they're going to identify the dates that it impacted your business. They'll put that into memorandum, and then if the IRS ever has a question about it, they'll respond with that.
Okay.
That being said, we don't think that they're going to meet many audits on the subject. One tax law firm I work with has processed over 10,000 ERTC applications. Now they've had 3 audits only out of 10,000. That's much less than the normal 1 to 3% audit rate. And they've been doing this for almost 2 years now.
And those audits are.
So they just take care of them. They're just, another tax law firm has had 4 mini audits. I said, well, what's a mini audit? That means they received a letter from an agent prior to sending out the refund checks, just trying to determine and confirming that the business was legitimate. The IRS is focusing on fraud. I watched a 2-hour webinar yesterday that the IRS put on. Their top enforcement agency put it on, and they went through the ERTC. They glossed right over how you qualify, and they went right to fraud. They assumed that the audience included professionals that were helping with the ERTC, and they said, look, you're looking for numbers that are too consistent, too even. You're looking for multiple addresses for their documents to be sent to the 941Xs. So they're concerned about fraud because they got a black eye during PPP because of all the fraud that went to, well, everybody, but people in prison and stuff like that.
Okay.
So that's their concern. But yeah, they'll take care of qualifying the business, ensuring that it's qualified. And some businesses don't qualify for each of the
And
6
protect
quarters.
the business
Yeah.
after the fact.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
protect the business with the audit guarantee.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, buddy.